In this video I would like to explain a feature of Aletheia that was mainly intended to increase the quality of ground truth, and that is validation. But even if you are using Aletheia for something else, you might find the one or other point useful. Before I start, I need to clarify what we mean with validation. Some of you might think of XML schemas and validation of XML files in that context. Aletheia does that as well when you open or save a page XML file, but that's not what I want to talk about today. The original purpose of Aletheia was to create ground truth of page layout and text content for scanned documents. The ground truth is the basis for measuring the performance of page analysis and recognition systems, such as Tesseract or Appy Fine Reader, for instance. Now, in order to be able to measure the performance accurately, you need correct and precise ground truth data. The validation I want to show you today can help to improve the quality of the ground truth and establish a baseline of things that are expected. What the validation does essentially is to check your page layout and text content against a set of predefined rules and guidelines. You are provided with a report containing errors, warnings and other notes. But enough talk, let me show you. You can open the validation dialog from the Home toolbar tab or by pressing Ctrl plus F1. At the bottom is a list with all the rules that can be validated against, and below you can select what layout objects to include in the report. I will go through the rules one by one and give examples. The first one is also the most basic one. It simply checks if you have specified what we call a ground truth and storage ID in the page metadata. You get a warning here, and if you select it, there's some extra information. The ID only really matters in larger workflows where you have to rely on labeling all data uniquely so you can easily find it and archive it. It's the first field in the metadata dialog, and because the ID is usually also part of the file name, we added a button which extracts the ID from there. And when I validate again, the warning is gone. The next rule is called check layers. By the way, there's slightly more information in the tooltips. We have not covered layers yet in previous tutorials. When you annotate the layout of a page, you should usually avoid overlapping regions, because that can mess up whatever processing you use for your data later. We also have a validation rule for that. You get a warning, and when you select the items, the corresponding regions will be highlighted as well. There are some exceptions, however, where overlapping regions should be allowed. This stamp here, for instance. That's what layers are for. You can add the image to a background layer and the stamp to a foreground layer. Then you do not get the warning that the regions overlap. So what does the check layers option do? It simply checks whether all regions are assigned to a layer. We encourage doing that, so if you use layers, assign all regions to a layer. The validation makes sure you didn't forget one region by accident. Then we have 3 rules for reading order. We have covered basic concepts in other tutorials. Simply put, the reading order can be used to specify the sequence in which text regions are supposed to be read. The first rule is to check if any reading order has been defined at all. The other 2 rules are to make sure that only the correct types of regions have been used and no regions have been forgotten. An example is the region containing the page number. Usually it shouldn't be part of the reading order. Text paragraphs, on the other hand, should be. Of course, you might have a different use scenario in mind. In that case, just don't use the validation rules. The next group of rules are for regions and other layout objects. The first few are geometric checks using the location of regions on the page. It's easiest to show with examples. The first check should never fail if you created all regions within Aletheia, but I loaded an externally modified file to show you. This is reported as an error because it can lead to serious problems when you try to use the data in other tools. Slightly less problematic is a region that is partly outside the page border that you defined. Nevertheless, it could point to a mistake that should be corrected. I have already explained the overlapping regions rule. By the way, in case you're wondering why there are 2 items here, this is because one region overlaps another, and the problem is simply reported twice, from different points of view, so to speak. Regions within parents relates to child objects such as text lines, words and glyphs. They are expected to be within the boundaries of their respective parent objects. If not, you get such a warning. The print space check is similar to the one for border, only this time some particular regions should be outside and some inside. The page number, for instance, is usually expected to be outside the print space. Intersecting polygon lines indicate that something went wrong when drawing a polygon and there's a loop somewhere in the outline. You can correct this by editing yourself or by using the Convert to Isostatic tool. But you should be aware that this can also introduce extra polygon points for diagonal lines. Let's continue. Pending regions, or layered objects to be correct, are text line, word or glyph objects that are not assigned to a parent. For us, this indicates an incomplete page layout. You can do this in Aletheia and also save it, but we do not encourage it and categorize this as an error. Another check for an incomplete page layout is the missing child objects rule. This will warn you if you created text line objects for one region, but not for another. So essentially it makes sure all text regions have child text lines and you haven't missed a region. The same is done for words and glyphs, of course. The next rule is deselected by default, because it can produce many false positives if the image quality isn't great. It uses the black and white image and looks for foreground components that are partly inside and partly outside a region. That might indicate that a region doesn't cover the whole content. The last group of rules focuses on text content. Check out the tutorial called Working with Text to learn more if you want. The first one is there more for historic reasons. There's a region attribute called plain text that can be used to enter the text content without any special characters, just standard letters, usually from the ASCII character set for the experts among you. This rule checks if the plain text has been entered and the normal text is missing, by mistake most likely. The second rule simply checks if text has been transcribed at all. So once you have a text region but no text, you would get a hint in the report. This will not create a warning or even an error, because you might not need the text in your use scenario. The next three rules look for specific characters in the text content. Some characters in Aletheia's special font are in the so-called private use areas of the Unicode text encoding standard. That means in those areas you can add whatever characters you like. In some cases, if you change your mind about some of them, it is better to leave the characters in the font, but classify them as deprecated. That way, you can replace them later automatically with certain rules. The first validation rule here would throw an error if it encounters such a deprecated character. We also added two specific characters that can be used as markers by the person who is transcribing the text. These are called pending character and replacement character. The pending character can be used if you encounter a symbol you don't recognize, for example. Then you could put the pending character. That way an expert can have a look at all pending characters later on in the workflow. The replacement character is intended for unreadable parts of a word. This can help in performance analysis, for example, where OCR errors involving this part of the text can be ignored. The last validation rule is closely related to the text propagation I explained in an earlier tutorial. It looks at the text content of a region, for instance, and compares the number of lines with the number of text line objects. Okay, now you know what the validation does in Aletheia. Although it was intended for ground truth production, you can of course use it for anything, OCR results for instance. This can give you some initial ideas of the quality. That's it, thank you for watching and have a look at our YouTube channel for more videos.